For our second panel of the morning, I'd like to introduce Seth Grae, President and CEO of Lightbridge Technology, Jay Surina, CFO of NuScale, Simon Irish, Chief Executive of Terrestrial Energy, and finally, Dr. Charles Forsberg of the MIT Nuclear Project. So, gentlemen, ladies, we'd like to go ahead and start the presentation, please. It's really interesting. I think it was probably not a smart idea.
Yeah, I think so.
So what we're looking at here are 4 companies that are looking to develop innovations in the product space, developing new reactors and new reactor concepts. So I'd like to start with Seth. You're CEO of Lightbridge. Tell us about what you're working on, what your company's working to will go ahead and help the existing fleet of reactors continue. And I have a slide presentation here for each of the panelists, and your first slide is up. So why don't you talk about the innovative designs that you are going ahead and working on?
Well, thank you, Chris. And I think it was great hearing the perspective of utilities on the previous panel, which really give a reality check on what are the conditions of markets, what technologies might be needed to help what utilities are looking for. Lightbridge is a small company. We're publicly traded on the NASDAQ Stock Exchange, and we're working closely with several utilities, developing nuclear fuel technology to address the main issues that utilities want to address, which is to improve the economics of nuclear power generation, both the existing plants that are operating as well as new plants that will be built, while enhancing the safety margins of the plants. There have been numerous improvements made to the existing reactors over the decades, as explained on the last panel. And each of these improvements seem quite mundane unto themselves, like enhancing the corrosion resistance of cladding material. But taken together, we've added the equivalent of several nuclear reactors worth of electricity to the United States fleet by increasing the electric output of the existing reactors while enhancing their safety. But we've reached the limit of what can be done. We've basically tapped out the ability to add more improvements, and it's not good enough. As we heard on the previous panel, nuclear power has to enhance its economics and its safety at the same time to compete economically with other energy sources. Now, the current fuel that's used in reactors, what's known as uranium dioxide fuel, has never gone through a real dramatic change, and it's at the limit of what can be done with that fuel. So rather than throw out the baby, the reactor, with the bathwater of the fuel, Lightbridge has invented a new type of nuclear fuel. And this fuel will improve the economics and safety of the existing reactors, answering what the utilities are looking for. In particular, top fuel managers at 4 large utilities are helping us, advising us, making sure we meet their needs. The fuel was patented last year. The utilities are going to be meeting with us at the NRC to prepare for licensing, with first use of what's called lead test assemblies and a commercial plant in the United States targeted for 2020.
Great. Let me forward to the next slide, which gives an illustration of this new type of fuel. So can you explain the technical characteristics regarding temperature, geometry, production that makes it so such a unique and innovative contribution to the existing fleet and the opportunities for them to expand and operate more economically?
Right, the current fuel, which has run very safely and very well, is made of uranium pellets inside a zirconium alloy tube. Again, that fuel has reached the limit of what we can do with it economically and safely. To go further, we need to do something totally different. What you see on this slide is a solid extruded metallic rod. It's not pellets inside a tube. This fuel runs about 1,000 degrees Celsius cooler than the existing fuels in reactors. It has much better heat transfer. It has no spacer grids holding the fuel together, which means the water flows more easily, meaning the pumps don't have to work as hard in the reactor. In addition to the economic improvement of more power from the reactor, there's also an economic improvement of the fuel cycle runs longer. So the reactors are shut down fewer days per year, but also the fuel rather significantly enhances the safety margins of the plant as well. So what we're seeing with the utilities we're working with are a win-win. We're starting to have discussions now with the Nuclear Energy Office at DOE as well. I was glad to see them included in the program. And we expect to have our next meeting with the NRC in the fall with licensing managers from several U.S. utilities preparing for the first use in U.S. commercial plants.
So the fact that this geometry and the fuel makeup, is it the same concentration of uranium, or how does that change, and what are the advantage for the nuclear operator who will able to use your technology to operate more efficiently and ultimately be more competitive in the marketplace?
Well, the fuel composition, is similar in that it is an enriched uranium mixed with a zirconium alloy. It's almost half uranium, almost half zirconium, but it's really that it's in a metallic form instead of an oxide form, and that it's one solid rod. As you see, a little bit spaced like licorice, which gives it a lot more surface area than a round tube, which partly helps with the heat transfer into the water. So it's the same isotopes, in a sense, of uranium and zirconium metal, but in a very different form.
Mm-hmm. And you've had recent patents on this technology?
Right. The main patent was granted in the United States on February 26th of last year. Then more recently, the patent was granted in Australia about a week ago, in South Korea, which has the third largest fleet of operating reactors in the world today. We're expecting the rest of the world's major nuclear market patents to come in about the next year.
Great. And the market for this innovative fuel, global market, U.S. market, where is it going to be going?
Well, it's a global market of virtually every reactor in the world. This fuel can be adapted to work in every type of light water reactor. The pressurized water reactors, the boiling water reactors, the Russian VVER reactors, NuScale's small pressurized water reactor, this fuel could be adopted to work in. And also it can work in the CANDU type, Canadian and Indian type reactors. So really, virtually all of the currently operating reactors in the world and virtually all of the currently planned and under construction reactors in the world.
So for a 2,000 megawatt reactor plant in Millstone, what could be the anticipated operating savings by switching to this fuel?
Right, Siemens did an independent report on looking at the fuel in a typical pressurized water reactor, and we have variants that will give a 10% power uprate, we have variants that will give a 17% power uprate, and for new build reactors, about a third more power. So you could build 3 reactors and get the power of 4 reactors. And in looking at a 10% power uprate, all in, the total cost of everything that needs to be done to switch to this fuel would be $85 million. With the power uprate in the longer fuel cycle, it would add about $60 million per year of revenue to that plant. So there's a fantastic internal rate of return to the utility operating the plant based on those numbers, and they would be selling 10% more power. They could go from an 18-month fuel cycle to a 24-month fuel cycle, so the reactor would be shut down less often, and they could peg the refueling cycle to the spring or to the fall, which has its own efficiencies versus the 18-month fuel cycle of spring-fall, which is not as good with the supply chains. So the numbers are very good, and the bottom line, about $60 million per year of added revenue from the 10% power uprate version of the fuel.
So that's certainly a significant benefit to operating reactors to go ahead and that. Tough questions. How are you financing the development of this fuel, and can we expect to see this first lead test assembly?
Right. Well, the financing to date has come more than 50% from generating our own revenue, earnings on our own revenues. We wrote the whole plan for nuclear power called the Roadmap for the United Arab Emirates. We also have done work for Kuwait and 4 other countries in the Middle East. We do some work in the United States. We do some work in Vietnam and other countries. And more than half our funding has come from our profits from our own consulting business as we help other countries develop nuclear power programs. The other half of the funding has come from large institutional investors, mostly in New York, that we've worked with a major investment bank in raising money as a NASDAQ traded company where they get liquid stock. So it's worked very well. It's actually gone quite smoothly, the financing of the company. And we are expecting the first use of lead test assemblies in US commercial reactors in 2020. We're expecting next year at Canadian Nuclear Labs in Canada to manufacture new samples of the fuel. The following year in 2017 to test them in the Halden reactor in Norway under prototypical commercial reactor conditions. And by 2020 have the lead test assemblies in the United States.
Great. So it really is a global effort with your research and development and ongoing development efforts and testing of the fuel. So we'll come back to some of the challenges that you may face going forward. But right now I'd like to switch to Jay Surina. Jay, you have, tell us about your small modular reactor and is this introduction, this reactor going to sort of complement the existing fleet, or is it going to sort of be developing for certain specific niche markets?
Well, we believe that the reactor that we're working on at NuScale is actually going to expand the market for nuclear power because it brings nuclear power to places that where we previously couldn't have nuclear power, mainly because of size considerations. So most of the reactors that are available today are 1,000 megawatts or greater, and many places, both in the United States and internationally, that's too large to put on the grids. So our plant is scalable. It's 50 megawatt modules, which can be ganged together to have plants as large as 600 megawatts. So we can build a plant for somebody if they want 50 megawatts. We can build a plant for 600 megawatts. It's just putting a number of modules together to make that plant. Also, what the plant is going to do for us is not only looking at electricity applications, but essentially the plant is, it's generating heat, and that heat can be used for many different things other than electricity. So we're looking at markets for desalinization, looking at possibly using these at oil refineries for hydrogen production, hybrid energy systems. So it expands the use of nuclear power beyond just typical electrical applications, even though at the first plant that we're going to build, which is scheduled to go online in 2023 in Idaho, is an electrical application of 12 modules for 600 megawatts.
So you've been the beneficiary of a cost-sharing agreement with DOE. Tell us about how that works and how it has helped you move your whole project forward.
Well, we're very fortunate to have garnered a cost-share agreement with the U.S. Department of Energy, and very thankful for that cost share. We're about to enter the third year of that cost share program. It's a $217 million cost share arrangement where over a 5-year period, the DOE is partially funding the development of our plant. And that's really benefited us not only from the standpoint of the dollars associated with it, because it's very expensive to develop nuclear power. As anybody in this room probably knows, we're not talking millions of dollars and tens of millions of dollars. To do something like what we're talking about, it's at least $1 billion to bring something like this to market. And I'm sure that gentlemen that are on this panel can talk to, the cost of developing different technologies associated in the nuclear world. It's very expensive. So besides the dollars that are associated with that Department of Energy cost share, we're also very much benefiting from the exposure that the being selected for that award has given us, and partnering with the Department of Energy to help bring the technology to fruition, and hopefully we will do that with the first plant that's going to be built here in Idaho in 2023.
You said earlier that this technology will expand the applications of nuclear power. Can you give us some examples of where you see, say, a first plant besides or second or third plant after the Idaho plant?
Well, in the United States, these plants will likely be used for coal plant replacement. So they're sized such that, and the reason we've gone to a 12-module facility for a 600-megawatt plant is targeting the market of expecting that coal facilities in the United States will likely have to shut down as a result of environmental policy, and something needs to replace that from a baseload perspective. And the size of these plants is ideal for doing that. So anything from 300 to 600 megawatts is a sweet spot in the United States for coal plant replacement, and we believe that the size of our plant will do that. Beyond the U.S., going outside to other places in the world that could use nuclear power in smaller bite sizes, island nations that don't need hundreds of megawatts, they need 50 megawatts or 100 megawatts or 150 megawatts. This gives them the option to build nuclear power that they haven't had in the past, and for many different applications. So in effect is, expanding that marketplace beyond what existing reactors that are available to be built today and beyond the current fleet of reactors that we have in the United States today.
And to explain the construction process where you have these things being developed in parallel, factory manufactured, and I'm going to move to the next slide here for you. So,
yeah, one of the main advantages of this type of technology and how we can get it to be economic. Many people ask us about, well, how can you take this plant? Most of the reason why we have large nuclear facilities is because of economies of scale. So how can you build a plant and have it economic and have it be small? Well, one of the main advantages of doing this is that you can factory manufacture the main component of the plant, which is the module that creates where the nuclear reaction takes place and creates the heat to form the electricity. And that's about 30% of the cost of the plant is that module. And that can be done in a factory and shipped to the plant without any fuel in it, and then brought into the plant, so you avoid having to, the term stick build, and do large civil construction on the plant site. So it makes the construction of the facilities much easier, and it takes a lot of the risk of doing the nuclear components out of doing it on site and doing it in a manufacturing environment. And since we're talking about building small modules, we're talking about building many of those at once, and the economies of scale get taken into account by building many of them in a factory. So that is one of the main reasons why we believe that this plant is going to be more economic than building the large plants that we have today. Much of the cost of nuclear power is in the capital cost of building the plant and the financing of that capital cost, not in the operating cost. And by factory manufacturing and making the plant so that it's as simple as possible, so that there are fewer things to break, fewer things to worry about, it not only makes it more economic, but it also makes it a much more safe plant with respect to making sure that we don't have a nuclear accident in this country.
One of the things that is of increasing importance in certain applications for nuclear power is the ability for the reactors to load follow. and this is a concept that we'll explore with all the panelists and come back to Seth as well. Can this reactor load follow, and how does it do so?
Yeah, so another big advantage of this reactor is the ability for it to load follow. So most large reactors that are on the grid today like to operate at 100% power, and it's difficult to turn them down. And as we have an increasingly large component of renewables on the grid, which are intermittent based upon when the wind blows or when the sun is out, it becomes the need to actually have plants that are flexible to be able to turn themselves down and not operate at 100% power, is a pretty big need. And this plant will be able to load follow in that it can, first of all, when we're talking a 600 megawatt plant which has 12 modules, we can just turn off a module and lower the plant power very quickly. The plant also has the capability of very quickly rejecting the steam instead of creating electricity, just rejecting it to the environment, to the condensers, and therefore shedding that power so we can actually turn the plant down very quickly and effectively. And that adds to the economics and the ability for the plant to meet the demands of the marketplace.
So far we've explored a near-term solution to address, improve the operating efficiency of the existing fleet. Jay is going to be introducing a reactor in a few years that provides an opportunity for a new type of concept that is a little bit more flexible. And now we're going to look at some fourth-generation technologies, which is some of the really innovative new technologies that are coming down the line. So, Simon, why don't you tell us what Terrestrial Energy is doing in developing of its molten salt reactor? What is a molten salt reactor, and what are the advantages that it provides?
Super. Thanks, Chris. Well, Terrestrial Energy, we're a private company. We're privately funded. And what we're doing is to innovate, to address what we believe to be one of the principal market needs today for nuclear and for energy generation generally. And that is for nuclear to compete with fossil fuels based on cost and convenience. We have a reactor system which we think is addressing that market need. It's called the Integral Molten Salt Reactor. And this is a liquid fuel reactor system. And this is a fundamental departure from the reactor systems that have been commercialized to date. Those you could class as solid fuel reactor systems. Ours is a liquid fuel reactor system. Being a liquid fuel reactor system, the fuel and the coolant are the same. They're a molten salt. Now, with this approach, we think we do in fact have this new commercial proposition for nuclear. And the new commercial proposition for nuclear energy, for nuclear power, is a reactor system, a nuclear power plant, which is far simpler and more cost competitive, which has a much smaller and more manageable waste footprint, and represents energy which is secure, reliable, and portable, grid-independent energy. So with that type of commercial profile, you have a reactor system that has the potential to be a game-changing energy innovation. And this requires some qualification. This is quite a substantial proposal. And I'd like to talk to a fundamental relationship in the world of nuclear power plant economics between the capital side of your nuclear power plant and the technology you're using. And that relationship is expressed on the slide. And you could refer to it as the fundamental equation of nuclear power plant economics. And that is that the capital cost of your nuclear power plant is directly related to your reactor system's inherent safety profile. It's related to your choice of reactor system you use in your nuclear power plant, and it's related to the inherent safety profile of that reactor system. This is not the same thing as the safety profile of your nuclear power plant. That's defined by your regulator. This is a different concept. It's the inherent safety profile of the reactor system that you're using. And the reason that this is fundamental is because the inherent safety profile of your reactor system drives pretty much all the costs. It drives cost to develop, cost to license, cost to construct. It drives CapEx. And as mentioned earlier, with respect to nuclear power, 70% of the cost of nuclear power is associated with capital and capital recovery. So what you need to do in your quest for an innovative nuclear technology these days, you need to look at the Gen 4 reactor systems that have a completely different inherent safety profile. If you start asking that question, you have the possibility of finding a reactor system that generates really material cost innovation in the construction of a nuclear power plant. Chris, perhaps on the next slide. Thank you. So we think we have a reactor system, the integral molten salt reactor system, that indeed has that inherent safety profile that supports cost innovation. And I want to touch on a couple of points which indicate the characteristics of this inherent safety profile. Firstly, using a liquid fuel, a molten salt, you have great coolants. Salts are excellent coolants. They're very high boiling points. They boil at 1,400 degrees C. That is obviously substantially higher than water. You also have a reactor system that operates at 1 atmosphere. That's low pressure, atmospheric pressure. And typically reactor systems these days operate at many times that, at 160 times atmospheric pressure. And when you're discussing your designs with your engineers, when you ask them design pumps, valves, containment for a reactor system that operates at 1 atmosphere, that's a much easier conversation, that's a much easier challenge than asking them to design pumps, valves and containments for a reactor system that operates at 160 times that. And the third point, which supports this inherent safety profile, special safety profile, is that when you're dealing with a liquid fuel has a property that a solid fuel does not have. This is high school science. Liquids can dissipate heat through a process of convection. And this is very important for the safety case for any reactor system. It's how you dissipate heat. Using a liquid fuel, we have the possibility to dissipate heat through the natural mechanism of convection. And this supports a very, very robust safety case, particularly the safety case with respect to decay heat management. The management of decay heat is probably the center of your safety case for any reactor system. So with this inherent safety profile, we believe we have a reactor system that has a completely different economic profile too. The linkage is this fundamental economic equation of nuclear power plant economics. We believe we have a reactor system with a very different economic profile, and that leads to a nuclear power plant which is smaller, simpler, far more manageable, a nuclear power plant with a much lower capex on a dollar to watt basis, and a nuclear power plant that has the possibility of competing at the center of the global energy industry based on cost and convenience with fossil fuels.
Thank you, Chris. We're going to move on now to Dr. Charles Forsberg, and he's going to talk about fluoride salt-cooled reactors. Doctor, I always thought that fluoride something was in my toothpaste.
Yes. Well, turns out it has some other applications. I should start by saying we have a slightly different goal than everyone else. Our goal is to have variable electricity output to the grid while the reactor operates at steady state. And that's a consequence of coupling a high-temperature reactor with a gas turbine cycle. Now, I should give you a little background history here. In the 1950s, the U.S. government spent $1 billion on the nuclear aircraft propulsion program to couple a nuclear reactor to a jet engine to power a bomber to bomb Moscow. Intercontinental ballistic missile came along, program got canceled, faster and cheaper. At that time, of course, people quickly thought, well, maybe we could hook a reactor to a gas turbine, but the gas turbine technology of the 1950s was disastrous in terms of utility applications. Now, what has happened in the last 50 years have been these extraordinary advances in gas turbines. Natural gas turbines are now up to about 60% efficiency. And because of those advances in gas turbines, it's now possible to couple a reactor to a gas turbine using liquid salts that were originally developed by the aircraft nuclear propulsion program, where the goal was couple a reactor to a jet engine. We just don't want to fly an aircraft, we want to make electricity. And we want to make a variable, constant reactor production, but variable electricity to the grid. Have the next slide. A couple of things important about this particular concept. We are coupled to a jet engine. Now, we can normally operate in base load mode, 42% efficiency, which is good but not exceptional. But a jet engine or a combined cycle plant is a very interesting machine. The hotter you run it, the higher the efficiency. And with our nuclear heat input, the efficiency is 42%. But we have the option, after the nuclear heating inside the jet engine, to add a little additional natural gas. And if we add that natural gas, the incremental natural gas to electricity efficiency is between 66 and 70%. Now, what's important about this is a top-of-the-line natural gas plant has an efficiency of 60%. Because we have a topping cycle, our efficiency of converting natural gas to electricity is substantially higher, which of course means we do very, very well in a commercial market because we can take less natural gas and produce more peak electricity at times of high prices. And the results, if you go through the grid analysis, is you increase the revenue 50 to 100% over that of a baseload nuclear power plant. There's also a storage technology, which I will not go into. So if somebody happens to crash the price of electricity, a lot of wind, a lot of solar, you buy that electricity, you put it in this plant, and you sell it at high prices. So it's got some other features to it. In short, it's a revolution in how you think about nuclear power with variable power output. That's the good news. The catch is, of course, nobody has built a salt-cooled reactor that combines high-temperature gas-cooled reactor fuel, salt cooling, and, of course, the gas turbine. The individual technologies exist, but there is a massive integration effort. And, of course, we're in the process of beginning the cycle of development that will ultimately lead to a very different kind of nuclear power plant. But unlike all of the other concepts, no FHR has ever been built. Having said that, there are several university consortiums working on that. Westinghouse is examining it. And about 3 years ago, the Chinese looked at the idea and said, it's not a bad idea, and threw a $500 million program at it. Got 500 people working on it full-time in China because they recognize the potential of the concept in terms of meeting variable power demand with a baseload plant. So they'll have a first test reactor up by roughly 2020. So we're making a lot of progress, but because it's the first of a new concept of reactor, we have a little further to go, which implies a commercialization date at the earliest of about 2030.
So I attended the Advanced Reactor Conference in Lowell, Mass. Hats off to Gilbert Brown here, who organized that. And the NRC came and said that some of these concepts, are post-2035. So what I'd like to get an understanding for is what are the biggest challenges that the panel faces in commercializing their reactors? And what is the role that the NRC is going to play in helping the process along or hindering the process along? Seth, why don't you talk about the challenges you're facing introducing a novel fuel or an innovative fuel into the regulatory process?
Well, first of all, I think it's a smaller and less expensive process to develop a new fuel for existing reactors than to develop a whole new kind of reactor with a whole new kind of fuel in it as well. So I think we have a little lower hurdle than some of the other projects. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to license anything, needs to have its own internal resources lined up. It needs to have the right expertise. In our case, that involves metal fuel technology. It involves fuel that has higher burn-up. There's different characteristics than current fuels. And what happened in May was that the 4 utilities advising us wrote a letter to the NRC asking the NRC to start to align those resources in anticipation of a license application that will be coming in the 2017 timeframe for first use in about the 2020 timeframe. And we are following up with the NRC on that, and from what we hear so far, that will be falling into place well. So unless you have a customer, unless you have utilities that want to use a product, and they're the ones that pay the budget to the NRC, and that pay for licensing at the NRC won't line up those resources and that will cause delays, it will increase costs. So in our case, that's now falling into place fairly well.
Great. Jay, design certification for the NuScale reactor is expected at the NRC when?
We're expected to put in our application at the end of 2016. We've been engaged with the NRC for years now, all the way back to, I believe, 2008. And although licensing is always a challenge in the nuclear industry because it's a long process and you need to be able to prove that what you're doing is safe, we are on track with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. We are paying the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to review our application. Part of that money is obviously coming from the Department of Energy through our cost share. And the NRC does have the resources and are lining them up to actually look at our application. So we're fortunate in that we do have a customer, and our technology is basically a repackaging of light water, pressurized water technology. It's not a complete relook at how nuclear power is done. So it shouldn't be as difficult to license as something that's a completely new concept.
Simon, how about you? You've got, what is your approach? I think it's rather innovative as well.
Yes, Chris, we're taking a slightly different approach. We're intending to go through the regulatory pathway provided by the CNSC in Canada, an alternative and world-class nuclear regulatory authority. The reason we're doing that is that the Canadian regulator, the CNSC, is a principles-based authority and not rules-based. This is quite a significant departure from the construction in the US, where the NRC effectively writes your rule book for your reactor and you follow it. And the question is, do they have the resources on hand, and have they completed all their work necessary for them to write the rule book for you? In Canada, these are obviously very broad simplifications actually, but in Canada, because it's principles based, it's up to you to defend your reactor and your rule book in the face of the safety principles that the CNSC and its staff lay down. And you can, in that regard, you have control over writing your rule book. It'll be scrutinized to the nth degree. But it does give you a regulatory pathway which is far more transparent when it comes to supporting nuclear innovation, transparent with respect to cost and time. And that's extremely important when you're a small private company seeking capital to finance nuclear innovation.
Well, I'd make a general observation as the NRC is in the business of licensing light water reactors. It does not have the current capability to license anything that is not a light water reactor. And thus, going forward, for any advanced reactor that is not a light water reactor, the question is, can it be done in the U.S.? And that'll only happen if there are significant changes in how Congress funds the NRC so that it looks at something outside of a light water reactor. So this may end up being in China, like Bill Gates' TerraPower. It's going to be in China. Or like the first AP1000 that's being built in China. And that's because of constraints in the United States regulatory system.
That seems to be sort of kind of a very foolish thing. You have 4 brilliant approaches to improving the competitiveness of nuclear power being developed here, and then it goes outside the country. Is there? It doesn't seem to make any sense. But.
I would certainly agree, but this is a question where Congress has to make some decisions. The rule sets set by Congress, and in particular, if you're going to look at non-conventional technologies, you have to have a funding and a priority mechanism that is set by Congress. So it's a congressional decision at the end of the day.
I don't know which would take longer, the NRC to license something or waiting for Congress to make some decisions. But I will, I will do something which might be sacrilegious in this group, which is I'm going to defend the NRC a bit. In our consulting work around the world, we see the NRC as defined as the highest standard in the world. China would not have ordered Westinghouse AP1000s had Westinghouse not been obtaining a design certification from the NRC. The biggest nuclear markets around the world would never have deployed their reactors without NRC involvement, and that is the case going forward, and that's one reason why we're starting at the NRC.
I would concur to it, but the issue here is once you move off of light water reactor technology, you're into a space that the current structure is not suited for.
Is a solution a significant increase in funding to explore some of these innovative concepts? It seems like it's...
Yes, that's at the NRC, that's certainly the limitation, because they are under a rule set that makes it very hard for them legally to move very far without some assistance of the U.S. Congress.
Any other further comments before I open the floor to questions?
Chris, I'll just make a comment on the NRC. I mean, the NRC came into being in the mid-70s at a stroke of a pen. That was in response to a new regulatory need, and over the last 35 years, they've discharged their requirement to supremely well. They've been a world-class regulator with respect to light water reactors. I'd argue, though, that in the nuclear industry now we have a slightly different market need. We're in an age where the industry needs to support innovation. And for the industry to be stimulated to innovate new ideas, you need a regulator that's more capable of supporting that innovation. And that, again, can happen with a stroke of a pen.
We have several questions here. Gilbert Brown, please, if you can sort of provide the...
Thanks for the shout-outs, too.
I'll take a check later.
I'm sitting next to a guy from a business school, so now I'm smart in business. And I always thought the idea was to get good people to do well what they do well, and not ask them to go outside what they're good at. So if the NRC has evolved into being this gold standard of regulator around the world for operating plants, maybe, just maybe, we need to create a different agency whose focus is on, as what was just said, innovation. Because we don't want to muck around with the NRC. They're too good at what they do. We all talked about the great reliability, the great operations, our relationship with INPO, we don't want to play around with that. That's our strength. So why go to that well? And let's create somebody, some system, somewhere, here, hopefully, that can do this. Because asking all the PhDs that we're turning out that are smart in thermal hydraulics and, from not only MIT, there are others, as a dig, to do this may not make sense. And it may be harder to get that stroke of a pen in the beginning, but it'll be easier at the end. Comment.
Well, I'll say the NRC is an independent regulator. Lightbridge goes to the NRC because Lightbridge fuel is for light water reactors that the NRC knows. But for the others,
There are lots of people working on what's the best strategy. It just hasn't been sorted out. But there's lots of different groups that are a separate group in NRC, how the DOE operates. I think we'll come to a solution, but it's not there yet.
I mean, in terms of recognizing the problem, the first step in coming up with a solution is recognizing the problem. There are this problem with this regulation problem in the US in terms of the potential impact it's having on supporting innovation is recognized. I mean, this is being debated and discussed already. What hasn't emerged is a new policy framework that the various agencies down in Washington can get behind. But the problem is definitely recognized.
Another question here, please.
Hello, I'm just trying to get, I'm sorry, my name is Susan Labonte-Bart. I'm from the Climate Action Business Association. I'm trying to get a sense of what is possible. As you know, the International Energy Agency has suggested that we need over $50 trillion of investment in order to keep the temperature under 2 degrees. What, in your opinion, can the nuclear industry, to what extent is capital really the problem? If we were to really have a World War II-like effort to promote nuclear development of safe, clean nuclear power, what could happen with that kind of money?
Well, I will make the historical observation that the French went to about 80% nuclear in about 20 years, and so did the Swedes. So if you make a decision, it's about 20 years to decarbonize the electric grid based on historical experience. Been done. Been there, done that.
And I would say from NuScale's perspective, we are, planning on deploying this technology in the, medium term, in the 2023 timeframe, and through the period when one would expect, especially in this country, when we're going to need baseload power with likely coal retirements. And there is a huge need, and we've looked at the market for, clean, reliable nuclear power, and it's huge. And we think we're on a path to actually meet that market. Unfortunately, that market is so big that, if we're successful, and there are others that are behind us that are trying to be successful as well, we wouldn't be able to meet the market demand. It's that big.
Last question, because I'm getting the signal that we're running late. Rod?
Yeah, real quickly, historically speaking, the reason the NRC is 90% funded by user fees from operating utilities is a presidential decision initiated by David Stockman when he was a budget director, who said that user fees is the way to fund this organization. We do need to have a way for innovation to put their money in, and for that money not to be sequestered. It was ridiculous for the NRC's budget to be affected by sequestration when it was all coming from user fees, not from the taxpayers.
I will make one simple observation. The pharmaceutical industry has an equally difficult regulatory structure. They don't operate that way. They have a different set of rules because Congress made a decision that better medicine was in the national interest. And so we can change the rule set to something like the pharmaceutical industry, which would avoid many of these issues. There are examples all over the regulatory structure. I'm not as familiar with it, but certainly the pharmaceutical industry is an alternative licensing strategy for new reactors, new reactor concepts.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Scott, please.
Yes, so 3 quick things. First of all, I want to thank all of our speakers today, and I want to thank Chris as well as our audience who attended both live and online. You're what make this special, so thank you again. Second of all, I mentioned before, this is the second event in a series we're doing around the country. So our third event is going to be in Pittsburgh at the end of September. I encourage everybody to check out our website. The URL is in our program, or you can Google nuclear going forward, and you'll be able to find it. The third thing relates to our website. So we're going to have all the sessions from today. They've been recorded, as well as the sessions that we did in New York. You can come watch them anytime. I know that part of our audience today had some issues with the streaming. So anytime you want, you can come on and check out all of the sessions today and watch anything you missed. Thank you very much, and we're looking forward to seeing you in Pittsburgh. Thank you, everyone.